The voice came from the fire, impossible to ignore. Moses stood frozen in the desert heat, his shepherd's staff trembling in his weathered hands. "Go back to Egypt," the voice commanded. "Lead my people to freedom." Him? A fugitive, a stuttering exile who had fled his past 40 years ago. How could he face Pharaoh? How could he convince an entire nation? The flames danced before his eyes, and through the crackling heat came words that would haunt him. "I will be with you." But being with him meant what, exactly? Moses knew the weight of chains in Egypt. He had seen Hebrew backs bent under whips, heard children crying for bread that never came. His people had forgotten hope, forgotten even how to dream of freedom. They were slaves, not just in body, but in spirit, their hearts bound by invisible chains that cut deeper than iron. And now God wanted him, a man who could barely string words together, to break those chains. The task felt crushing, impossible. Moses descended from the mountain with legs that barely held him. Every step toward Egypt felt like walking into a furnace. His brother Aaron met him at the border, eyes wide with questions. Together they entered the slave quarters, where thousands of desperate faces turned toward them. Moses opened his mouth to speak of liberation, but the words caught in his throat. He saw doubt in their eyes, heard whispers behind calloused hands. Who was this stranger promising miracles? Aaron had to finish his sentences, had to carry the message Moses could not deliver. Pharaoh laughed when they came before his throne. "Let my people go," Moses had said, his voice shaking. The Egyptian king leaned forward, gold glinting on his chest, amusement dancing in his dark eyes. "Your God?" he sneered. "I know no God but myself." The audience chamber echoed with mocking laughter. Guards stepped forward, hands on weapons. Moses felt small, insignificant, a desert shepherd in a palace of power. But he remembered the fire, remembered the promise. He lifted the staff in his hand, the simple wooden rod he had carried for decades. What happened next silenced the laughter. The staff struck the marble floor and transformed, became a writhing serpent that sent courtiers scrambling. Pharaoh's magicians matched the trick, but Moses' serpent devoured theirs, swallowed them whole. Still, Pharaoh's heart remained hard as stone. He sent Moses away with threats, increased the burden on the Hebrew slaves. That night, Moses knelt in darkness, feeling the weight of failure. Had he heard wrong? Was this all madness? The Nile turned to blood the next morning. Fish floated dead on crimson water, and Egypt choked on the stench. Moses watched from the riverbank, horrified by the destruction, yet knowing it was necessary. Pharaoh still refused. Frogs came next, millions of them, covering every surface, invading beds and ovens and grain stores. Then gnats, then flies, each plague more terrible than the last. Moses felt the burden of each catastrophe, saw Egyptian mothers weeping, saw livestock dying in fields. Is this what freedom costs? He wondered. His own hands felt stained, though he knew he was merely the messenger. The staff in his grip had become something more than wood, more than a simple tool. Through it, God's power flowed like lightning, unstoppable and terrible. Boils erupted on Egyptian skin. Hail rained from clear skies, crushing crops and shattering bones. Locusts darkened the sun, devouring what little remained. darkness fell, thick as wool, for 3 days straight. Each time, Pharaoh almost broke. Each time, his pride rebuilt the walls around his heart. Moses grew weary, aged years in months. The Hebrews looked at him with hope and fear mixed together, unable to understand why their liberation required such suffering. He had no answers for them, only faith that the voice from the fire knew what it was doing. "I will be with you," the promise echoed in his memory. But sometimes being with someone meant walking through hell together. Then came the final plague, the one that broke Pharaoh's will. The death of the firstborn swept through Egypt like a cold wind, sparing only those houses marked with lamb's blood. Moses heard the wailing that night, heard a nation's grief rising to the stars. He felt no triumph, only sorrow for what had been necessary. When morning came, Pharaoh summoned him with hollow eyes. "Go," the king whispered. "Take your people and go. Leave us to bury our dead." 600,000 souls poured out of Egypt, a river of humanity carrying whatever they could grab. Moses led them east, toward the wilderness, toward freedom they had never tasted. But freedom came with fear. They had no food stores, no clear destination, only faith in a man who still doubted himself. Children cried. Old people stumbled. The strong helped the weak, and slowly, painfully, they moved forward. Behind them, Egypt grew smaller on the horizon. Then, the horizon darkened again. Pharaoh had changed his mind, gathered his army, his fastest chariots. The thunder of hooves and wheels reached the Hebrew camp like approaching doom. Moses climbed a ridge and saw them coming, saw the sun glinting off bronze armor and spear points. His people saw them too. Panic rippled through the crowd like wind through grain. "We should have stayed slaves," voices cried. "At least we were alive. You brought us here to die." Moses felt their fear because it was his own. He had led them to this, to a trap between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea. Water stretched before them, impossible to cross. Death raced behind them, impossible to escape. This was the moment his faith died or lived. He thought of the burning bush, of the staff in his hand, of every plague and wonder. "I will be with you." The words were not comfort anymore. They were a command, a certainty, a truth that transcended understanding. He raised the staff above his head. The gesture felt foolish, futile, the act of a desperate man. But the staff was no longer just wood. It was a channel, a connection between earth and heaven. Wind began to blow, gentle at first, then stronger, then with force that bent trees and sent sand swirling. The Red Sea began to move. Water pulled back from the shore, drawn by invisible hands, piling higher and higher on both sides. A path opened through the sea. Dry ground appeared where moments before there had been fathomless depth. Walls of water stood on either side, held in place by nothing but divine will, towering and terrible and beautiful. Moses stared at the impossible made real. His people stared. Even the approaching Egyptian army slowed, uncertain. "Go," Moses shouted, finding his voice at last. The first Hebrews stepped onto the seafloor, tentative, testing. The ground was solid. They walked faster, then ran, then poured through in a flood of liberation. Moses walked among them, staff still raised, watching the water walls hold. He saw fish suspended in the liquid, saw the depths of the sea exposed to sunlight for the first time since creation. Children laughed, touching the walls with wonder. Old people wept with joy and terror mixed. The journey through took hours, 600,000 souls crossing from slavery to freedom on ground that should not exist. Behind them, the Egyptian chariots entered the path, wheels churning the miraculous road. They were halfway through when Moses reached the far shore. He turned, saw his people still crossing, saw the Egyptians gaining speed. The voice came again, not from fire this time, but from the depths of his soul. Lower the staff. Moses hesitated for just a heartbeat, then obeyed. The water walls trembled, shuddered, collapsed inward with a roar that shook the earth. The sea reclaimed its territory in seconds, swallowing chariots and horses and men in a crushing embrace. Silence fell, broken only by waves lapping at the shore. Moses stood with his people on dry land, the staff heavy in his hands. Behind them, the sea was just a sea again, giving no sign of the miracle it had witnessed. No Egyptian remained to pursue them. The chains of slavery, forged over generations, lay broken not by human strength, but by faith. His people fell to their knees, some in prayer, some in shock, all in wonder. Moses raised his hands toward heaven, and the gesture was answered by thousands of voices lifted in praise. They sang of deliverance, of power beyond understanding, of a God who kept promises. The song rose from the desert floor to the sky, carrying gratitude and awe and newborn hope. Moses felt tears on his weathered face, felt the burden of leadership transform into something else, something lighter. He had doubted, he had feared, but he had also trusted, and trust had been enough. Their chains were broken not by weapons, but by faith. The journey ahead would be long, filled with trials Moses could not yet imagine. But in this moment, with the sea behind them and freedom before them, anything seemed possible. This story is not just about ancient miracles, but about the power that lives in each of us when we dare to trust. Faith can shatter any chains. What holds you captive?